This is Dr. Adel Bondok, Professor of Anatomy and Neuroscience, Mansoura University, Egypt. I will talk about the cerebellar connections and the cerebellar control of movement. So I will talk about the three cerebellar peduncles. Okay. Start by the inferior cerebellar peduncle. This is the inferior cerebellar peduncle. It is formed of two parts, restiform body and juxta-restiform body. Restiform body contains all the fibers entering the cerebellum. Start by dorsal spinocerebellar tract. This dorsal spinocerebellar tract originates from the Clark's nucleus of the spinal cord and it carries proprioceptive information from the trunk and the lower limb. Second one, coniocerebellar tract. This coniocerebellar tract arises from the accessory cognate nucleus in the medulla and it carries proprioceptive information from the upper limb. So, dorsal spinocerebellar tract carries proprioceptive information from the trunk and the lower limb. Coniocerebellar tract carries proprioceptive information from the upper limb. Then we have arcuatocerebellar fibers. Arcuatocerebellar fibers carries information from the cerebral cortex to the cerebellum. Olivocerebellar fibers from the inferior olivary complex to the cerebellum of the opposite side. It carries motor information from the cerebral cortex and the basal ganglia and the sensory information from the spinal cord to the cerebellum. Reticulocerebellar fibers carry information from the reticular formation to the cerebellum, and these fibers are similar to the olivocerebellar fibers in carrying motor information from the cerebral cortex and sensory information from the spinal cord to the cerebellum. And we have also trigeminocerebellar fibers from the spinal trigeminal nucleus to the cerebellum, and these fibers convey sensory information from the face to the cerebellum. Regarding the juxta-restiform body, the juxta-restiform body contains the fibers from or to the vestigial nucleus, or actually fibers connecting the cerebellum with the vestibular system. So we have vestibulocerebellar fibers. These vestibulocerebellar fibers either direct from the vestibular nerve itself or indirect from the vestibular nuclei. Then we have cerebello-vestibular and the cerebello-reticular from the vestigial nucleus to the reticular nuclei and the vestibular nuclei. Therefore, the inferior cerebellar peduncle is formed of restiform body and juxta-restiform body. The restiform body contains olivocerebellar tract. This olivocerebellar tract is formed of climbing fibers. It synapses with Purkinje cell dendrites. Okay, and it forms the main component of the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Second one, dorsal spinocerebellar tract from Clark's nucleus. It carries proprioceptive information from the trunk and the lower limb. Coniocerebellar tract from the accessory cognate nucleus to the cerebellum. It carries proprioceptive information from the upper limb to the cerebellum. Arcuatocerebellar fibers of two types, ventral external arcuate fibers and the stria medullaris of the fourth ventricle. These fibers convey information from the cerebral cortex to the cerebellum, similar to the pontocerebellar fibers. And reticulocerebellar fibers or reticulocerebellar tract from the reticular formation to the cerebellum, and these fibers convey motor and sensory information to the cerebellum. And trigeminocerebellar tract from the spinal trigeminal nucleus to the cerebellum. Juxta-restiform body contains connections of the vestigial nucleus. Okay, vestibulocerebellar tract. Vestibulocerebellar tract either direct or indirect. Direct from the vestibular nerve, indirect from the vestibular nuclei. And then cerebello-vestibular from the vestigial nucleus to the vestibular nuclei, and cerebello-reticular from the vestigial nucleus to the reticular nuclei. Cerebello-vestibular to the reticular nuclei and to the vestibular nuclei, and from the vestibular nuclei to the spinal cord, vestibulo-spinal, and to the extraocular muscles via medial longitudinal fasciculus. Regarding the middle cerebellar peduncle, middle cerebellar peduncle is formed exclusively of pontocerebellar fibers. Pontocerebellar fibers from the pontine nuclei of the opposite side. These fibers cross to the opposite side and form the middle cerebellar peduncle and terminate in the neocerebellum, the lateral zone of the cerebellum. These fibers convey information from the four lobes of the cerebral cortex. So these fibers, pontocerebellar fibers, convey motor information from the motor areas and the sensory information from the sensory areas to the pontine nuclei, and from the pontine nuclei the fibers cross to the opposite side to the neocerebellum. Regarding the superior cerebellar peduncle, afferent fibers and efferent fibers. We have three afferent fibers. The first one is ventral spinocerebellar tract. Ventral spinocerebellar tract arises from the spinal border cells of the spinal cord and reaches the cerebellum with the through the superior cerebellar peduncle, and it carries information from the lower limb, okay, or actually from the leg. Second one, tectocerebellar, trigeminocerebellar fibers from the mesencephalic nucleus of the trigeminal nerve. These fibers convey unconscious proprioceptive information from the face and eyes and palate to the cerebellum. Trigeminocerebellar, unconscious proprioception to the unconscious proprioceptive fibers to the cerebellum, and the tectocerebellar fibers from the superior and inferior colliculi. They convey information, visual and auditory information to the cerebellum. So the afferent fibers of the superior cerebellar peduncle are ventral spinocerebellar tract, trigeminocerebellar tract, and the tectocerebellar tract. The efferent fibers are two: dentatothalamic fibers. Dentatothalamic fibers from the dentate nucleus to the thalamus, and the dentatorubral tract from the dentate nucleus to the red nucleus, and then from the red nucleus to the thalamus, rubrothalamic, and then from the thalamus to the motor and the premotor areas, thalamocortical fibers. Actually, the cerebellar hemisphere controls the muscles of the same side of the body. Cerebellar hemisphere controls the muscles of the same side of the body due to double crossing. The first crossing is dentatorubral. The second crossing is rubrospinal. So control the same side. Okay, the second crossing, second one, dentatothalamic, then thalamocortical, then corticospinal. So the cerebellar hemisphere controls the muscles of the same side of the body through double crossings. The first one, dentatorubrospinal. Second one, dentatothalamo-corticospinal. Therefore, lesion in one cerebellar hemisphere causes manifestations on the same side of the body. And finally, how the cerebellum control our movement. The cerebellum receives the information from the trunk and lower limb through the dorsal spinocerebellar tract, and from the lower limb by the ventral spinocerebellar tract, and from the upper limb by coniocerebellar tract. So the cerebellum receives the motor information from the trunk and lower limb and the upper limb. Trunk and lower limb, dorsal spinocerebellar tract; lower limb, ventral spinocerebellar tract; upper limb, coniocerebellar tract. The cerebellum sends this information to four areas: to the red nucleus, and then from the red nucleus to the spinal cord via rubrospinal tract. Second one, to the thalamus. Okay, this one dentatothalamic, and from the thalamus thalamocortical fibers, and from the cerebral cortex area 4 and area 6 to the spinal cord, corticospinal tract. The third input to the vestibular nuclei, this is cerebellovestibular, and from the vestibular nuclei to the spinal cord, vestibulospinal tract. And the fourth input to the reticular formation, cerebello-reticular, and from the reticular formation to the spinal cord by reticulospinal tract. Again, how the cerebellum control our movement. Okay, it receives information from the muscles of the trunk and the lower limb by dorsal spinocerebellar tract. From the lower limb by ventral spinocerebellar tract. Therefore, information from the lower limb is carried by dorsal and ventral spinocerebellar tracts. It receives information from the upper limb by coniocerebellar tract. The cerebellum sends this information to four areas, to the red nucleus, and then from the red nucleus to the spinal cord, rubrospinal tract, to the thalamus, to the ventral anterior and the ventral lateral nuclei, and from the thalamus to the motor and the premotor areas, and from these areas to the spinal cord, corticospinal tract. Third pathway to the vestibular nuclei, and from the vestibular nuclei to the spinal cord, vestibulospinal tract. Fourth one to the reticular formation, and from the reticular formation to the spinal cord via reticulospinal tract. And thank you very much. Best wishes and good luck.